Martin had never cared much for subtlety. In fact, the very notion of traveling through time had appealed to him precisely because of how brazenly adventurous he could be. He was convinced that once he invented his homemade temporal tour guide 3000, traveling through history would be as convenient as stepping onto a cruise ship. He boasted to anyone who would listen that it was going to be a piece of cake. Set the dial, strap on his helmet, press the big red button, and voyage on instant departure into the wonders of the Roman Empire. After all, Martin had always fantasized about seeing gladiators in the Colosseum, the roar of the crowd, the clang of swords, the subtle aroma of too many people packed into one space, the occasional lion prowling for a snack. Who wouldn't want to witness that firsthand? On the afternoon of his inaugural voyage, Martin carefully adjusted the dial on the side of the Temporal Tour Guide 3000. The device was a complicated mass of wires, gears, and a few suspicious tubes that glowed unstable shades of green. Still, he felt confident. He had read half a manual on time travel from an obscure website that might not have been entirely legitimate, but the excitement was too strong to wait for safer or more empirical sources. He triple-checked the date, 100 CE, the height of the Roman Empire under Emperor Trajan. "This is it," he declared with a grin. "Prepare yourself, Emperor. I'm on my way to shake hands with a legend." Martin raised his arms in a dramatic flourish, as though he were already standing in front of adoring crowds in a stadium. "Romans, lend me your ears," he shouted before slamming his hand onto the big red button. There was a bright flash, a disorienting whoosh, and then a long moment of silence. Looked like something was happening. Martin braced himself, imagining splendid marble architecture, men in togas, and the sweet tang of wine. The swirling void of time was a kaleidoscope of lights, and his stomach flipped with a mixture of nervousness and glee. Unfortunately, Martin couldn't quite manage to keep track of all the instructions from the half-read manual, so when sparks erupted from the machine, he couldn't remember if that was normal or not. He felt himself slam, not gently but forcibly, into the ground. He opened his eyes to see what he thought was the wondrous majesty of ancient Rome. Instead, he saw a cluster of people in tunics. No, wait. Some wore chainmail and others wore dresses that didn't quite match the Roman style he had pictured. Instead of togas, he was greeted by coarse fabrics, laced bodices, and pointed hats. Squinting at some flags waving overhead, Martin thought maybe they adored the emperor so much they'd commissioned an entire festival in his honor. The decorations seemed a bit off. Red and gold standards with SPQR were nowhere in sight. Instead, there were heraldic lions, castle silhouettes, and tall wooden pavilions that looked more like medieval tents than anything Roman. "Greetings, fellow Romans," Martin bellowed, jumping up and throwing his hands wide. The crowd fell awkwardly silent. He stood in a clearing that might have been the center of a festival. There was a cluster of wooden stalls, tables lined with goblets of ale, and the faint smell of roasted turkey leg. Knights and maidens circulated among the stands, greeting fairgoers while a cheerful minstrel strummed a lute. Martin brushed the dust off his jacket, ignoring the perplexed stares of people who, apparently, had never seen a time travel helmet attached to a battered contraption of wires. He smiled, though, hoping to charm them with his enthusiastic wave. Yes, I know I'm wearing somewhat futuristic garments, but fear not," he announced. "I come in peace. I merely wish to see the emperor, or Trajan, or at least a legionary or two." One of the men, wearing an obviously homemade suit of plate armor, regarded Martin with suspicion. "Emperor?" he repeated. "Sir, this is the Baron's fete. Are ye lost?" Martin tried not to notice the terrible British accent, attributing it to perhaps a local variant of Latin. Surely everyone must be speaking Latin, but centuries of evolution might have skewed it. Lacking fluency in the language aside from a few memorized phrases, Martin figured it was best just to keep up the charade and hope the translator device strapped to his wrist would decode enough to get by. "I am Martin, traveler of distant lands," he declared, "and I come to pay tribute to Caesar." More confused stares followed this announcement, but he refused to let that dampen his spirit. He'd promised himself an authentic Roman experience. And that's what he would have. The first major sign that something wasn't as it seemed occurred when he walked past a wide booth labeled, "Archery game, hit the target, win a prize," with a jolly-looking man in a tunic calling, "Step right up, my lord, and try your skill with a bow." That definitely didn't belong in the Roman Empire, but maybe they had archery contests too? Martin tried to recall his historical knowledge. Romans had archers in their military, but did they host little fair games for the public? Confused, he decided maybe the booth was a small comedic version or some new policy under Emperor Trajan. He decided such trifles wouldn't deter him. Eager to find more evidence of Roman culture, Martin continued through the fair, where he found stalls selling flower crowns and small wooden swords for children. Another booth offered turkey legs stuffed with herbs, and a friendly woman insisted he sample some fresh bread hot from the hearth. The smells of the place felt cozy and exuberant. Everyone chattered happily. Some folks wore velvet doublets, and others had dresses with wide skirts. A few knights bellowed jolly greetings, brandishing swords that appeared either too dull or too cheaply made to be real. Martin was no expert in historical accuracy, but these outfits struck him more as something from a medieval storybook. Yet he reminded himself that the Romans had soldier uniforms that changed over time, plus maybe this was a rural province where clothing was more rustic. "Excuse me," Martin said to a passing lady who had a wimple around her head. "Can you direct me to the Imperator's palace, or does the Emperor reside nearby?" She blinked at him several times. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, dear. The only castle around these parts is the Baron's Keep. You're welcome to speak to him if you wish. He's often found by the jousting lists." Then she giggled, curtsied, and moved on, leaving Martin baffled. The hair on his neck tingled with the suspicion that he was in the wrong place. Yet, the costumes, the flags, the environment, it was definitely from a period older than his own. So it must be ancient Rome, right? Just maybe not the capital? Yeah, he told himself, I must be in some outlying province. The architecture is probably behind the times. Martin's confidence began to waver when he got lost near a blacksmith's stall. A hefty man in a leather apron hammered away, forging horseshoes, swords, and nails. Sparks flew dramatically, and the blacksmith took a moment to greet Martin with a loud, "Ha-ha!" Martin smiled, trying to recall how to say "take me to your emperor" in Latin, but all he managed was a garbled, "Ave Imperator?" The blacksmith cocked his head, uncertain. "We don't have an emperor around here, friend. We have a baron, a local lord, and occasionally the king visits if we're lucky. Are you a performer in the fair?" "A performer?" Martin echoed, shocked at the suggestion. "I'm a traveler from the future compared to your perspective, obviously, but from my vantage point, I have come from the same era of togas and Caesar. You're telling me there's a king? That doesn't sound like the Roman system at all." The blacksmith gave a hearty laugh. "What do you mean, togas and Caesar? You speak nonsense, friend. But if you're trying to amuse the crowd with your funny contraption, you're doing an excellent job." Then he winked and hollered, "Good luck to you." Martin felt a bead of sweat roll down his forehead. This wasn't going according to plan. Thinking a short rest might help, Martin wandered toward the nearest large tent. Attracted by the aroma of roasted meat and honey cakes, he tried to reason it out. If there was a baron, that suggested a feudal system, which typically belonged to the Middle Ages. But that would be centuries after ancient Rome's classical period. So how could the time machine have gotten it so wrong? Perhaps the dial had slipped, or the wires had short-circuited? Did the swirling lights malfunction? Was he seeing illusions? As he entered the tent, he found a hearty gathering of knights, ladies, and a small group of traveling entertainers. They had a fire roaring in the center, cooking an entire pig on a spit. Goblets of ale and wine were passed around amid laughter and clinking toasts. He found a seat near a man strumming a lute. The minstrel paused, taking an interest in Martin's bizarre clothing. "Hello there. You appear, well, distinct. Are you from another land?" Martin forced a smile. "Indeed, from a land far, far away. I came to see Rome, but I ended up here. Are there any Roman legions nearby? Perhaps I can find a direct route to Trajan." The minstrel laughed so enthusiastically that he nearly dropped his lute. Roman legions, my friend. It's the year of our Lord, 1300 something, and the only armies around are loyal to King Edward. That mention of Trajan is a centuries-old reference. You must be playing a character for the comedic portion of the fair. Martin blinked. The minstrel's words sank in with the subtlety of a mallet. He was in the 14th century. That did not fit his pre-programmed settings. But that's impossible, he whispered, momentarily horrified. The minstrel simply grinned. Impossible or not, the only Romans these days are the ghosts in ancient tales. Martin clung to a sliver of hope. Wait, maybe I'm in a reenactment camp run by time travelers who also wanted to see Rome, and they're pulling my leg? But the wooden beams, the rustic smell, and everything about the fair was too authentic. The comedic possibility that he was simply lost in a Renaissance fair or medieval festival in the 21st century also crossed his mind, but the lack of modern structures, cell phones, or plastic seemed telling. For a quick second, he thought maybe it was a well-done living history event. But glancing outside the tent, he saw the rolling countryside, the real stone keep perched on a hill. This was no modern tourist attraction. Deciding to confirm whether he was in the real Middle Ages, Martin excused himself and set out across a grassy field, heading toward the Baron's keep. As he approached, he crossed a wooden bridge over a muddy moat. The smell was ghastly, and that alone made it very clear these were not modern times. Medieval sanitation was not something Martin had ever wanted to experience firsthand, yet here he was. The keep's gate was guarded by two men in chainmail who eyed Martin's strange contraption. "Halt, friend. State your business." He gave a nervous grin. "I come seeking an audience. I understand you might have a baron or a local lord inside. Or perhaps an emperor?" The guard on the left frowned. "We have no emperor. Whose domain do you hail from anyway?" Martin's inventions, strapped at various angles to his body, seemed to make them uneasy. After an awkward exchange, they allowed him to pass once they realized he wasn't brandishing any obvious weapons. "Remember," the guard warned, "no funny business." Martin found his way into the keep's great hall, a large room lined with long tables. Banners depicting griffins and lions hung from the rafters. At the center, on a raised dais, sat a stout man wearing a fur-trimmed robe and a wide-brimmed hat that seemed more decorative than practical. Martin approached timidly. He quickly decided that if he couldn't find Emperor Trajan, maybe he'd gather enough information to fix his time machine and try again. "Greetings, my lord," Martin said, bowing exaggeratedly in a manner that made him look more like a comedic court jester than a well-mannered diplomat. "I am Martin, a traveler from a distant territory. I appear to have arrived here by error. You see, I was aiming for the Roman Empire, but I suspect something went amiss. Could you please direct me to any library or learned scholar who might help me correct my path?" The Baron eyed Martin's helmet with curiosity. "You speak in riddles, traveler. The Roman Empire? That fell ages ago. I do not see how you could be searching for something so ancient unless you're a traveling minstrel known for comedic farce." The Baron paused, turning to a figure at his side. "Fetch that friar who fancies himself an alchemist. Perhaps he can interpret the raving of our guest." A short while later, the friar arrived, stooped and wearing a brown hooded robe. He introduced himself as Friar Edmund. His gentle, inquisitive eyes lit up at the sight of Martin's complicated gear. Martin tried to explain the concept of traveling through time, referencing classical physics, momentarily forgetting that such terms likely meant little here. He attempted to speak about temporal displacement, quantum entanglement, and wormholes, receiving only politely blank stares. Friar Edmund gave a thoughtful nod nonetheless. "The mysteries of the cosmos are vast indeed. Perhaps you are a traveler chosen by Providence to appear in our lands. Though your talk of Romans and magic contraptions is odd, I am not blind to wonders." At that, Martin felt some relief. Maybe this man could help him craft a solution. He had read that medieval alchemists were adept at fiddling with unknown substances. Maybe they could fix or replicate the pieces needed for his time machine to function again. The Baron, enthralled by the possibility that Martin was a comedic genius bringing new entertainment, decided to host a feast that evening. Bards sang, jugglers performed, and everyone feasted on roasted meats and sweet pies. Martin was given a place of honor near the Baron. "I trust you'll reward us with a glimpse of your magic contraption," the Baron said, raising a cup and toast. By now, Martin realized that explaining the nature of the device's purpose might just get him labeled a sorcerer or a dangerous wizard. That could be problematic, so he smiled politely. "I'm afraid it's in need of some repairs first, but once it's functioning, you'll see it can show me glimpses of other realms." The Baron laughed heartily, apparently pleased with this mysterious explanation. After the feast, Martin tried to find some solitude in a corner of the Great Hall. Using lantern light, he pored over the battered instructions he'd printed from that questionable website about time travel mechanics. He quickly realized that a key piece of the machine, the flux regulator, had shorted out during the jump. Without it, he couldn't lock onto the correct year even if he tried to use the rest of the device. He needed a properly shaped metallic coil that could handle high-energy quantum transitions. In the Middle Ages, that might as well have been an artifact from another planet. Frustration churned in his stomach. Was he stuck? Did he have enough knowledge to rig a substitute from basic metal? The blacksmith might be able to craft something if Martin could explain it, yet how could the blacksmith replicate high-grade electronics with a hammer and an anvil? As dawn broke, Martin ventured back into the fair where the festivities carried on. He gathered scraps of metal from the blacksmith in exchange for telling outlandish stories about his Roman escapades. Since the fairgoers believed he was some form of wandering performer with tall tales, it became easy to weave comedic yarns, especially when audiences rewarded him with coins or random goods. He described the Roman chariots, carefully omitting the fact that his only knowledge came from watching too many sword and sandal Hollywood films. People clapped, believing Martin's nonsense the best entertainment they'd had in years. Meanwhile, Friar Edmund proved surprisingly enthusiastic. He tested different metal shapes and hammered out a coil that might pass for Martin's flux regulator, though it wasn't exactly the same. "We will pray for divine inspiration," the friar said. Martin felt pangs of worry. This coil was crude, but it was all they had. If he tried to power up the time machine with it, it could blow up in his face. And that was if he was lucky enough to avoid drawing suspicion of witchcraft. So Martin told the friar he might need something else. Maybe a catalyst. "Bring me the strongest vinegar, or something with an acidic quality," he said, remembering old experiments. Friar Edmund nodded. "I shall gather you the best from our stores." Determined to salvage his predicament, Martin snuck out one night to tinker with the device in secret. Propped up in a secluded meadow beneath moonlight, he inserted the coil, poured the vinegar-like concoction into a small chamber, attached wires that glowed faintly in the darkness, and remembered the step: invert the polarity. But as soon as he rotated the coil, the device whirred with a terrifying hum. Lights flashed, then it abruptly died. Gray smoke trickled from a crack in the side. Martin groaned. Maybe he'd shorted it out further. Overhead, the medieval sky sparkled with stars, untainted by modern light pollution, beautiful, but it did little to quell the sense of sinking dread. He trudged back to the fair, trying to keep cheerful. At least, with a curious baron and a supportive friar, he was safe for the moment. During the day, he performed silly pantomimes, half in jest, half an attempt to glean new resources. The baron was thoroughly entertained by Martin's futuristic illusions and insisted he join the day's joust as a special guest. "We'll present you as Martin the Marvelous, the foreign traveler with comedic flair." Everyone loved the idea. Knights clanked in their armor, excited to test any new challenger. Martin swallowed hard. He wasn't about to mount a horse while wearing the bulky device that kept shocking him. But to stay on good terms with everyone, he reluctantly agreed to be part of the spectacle. The jousting field was a grand scene. Knights in shining armor paraded their equally adorned horses. The crowd cheered and waved colored flags. Martin, dressed ridiculously in a borrowed chainmail shirt, approached a horse that looked less than impressed with him. People in the stands called out, "Show us your magic, Martin the Marvelous!" The truth was, Martin had never ridden a horse in his life. He climbed up awkwardly, almost turning himself upside down at one point. The horse neighed in protest. Meanwhile, his opponent, a seasoned knight known as Sir Lionel, trotted confidently, lance in hand. Martin gulped, wishing he could vanish. But maybe, just maybe, All he needed to do was look the part and then yield politely. Medieval jousts might have had rules about not killing comedic performers, right? Sir Lionel thundered toward Martin. Instead of galloping forward to meet the charge, Martin's horse took one look at the situation and decided to wander sideways toward a crowd of onlookers. The crowd roared with laughter. The Baron looked on with delight, thinking it was part of an elaborate comedic act. Martin's knees shook, trying to turn the horse back to the track. By the time he'd wrestled the reins around, Sir Lionel was already turning for another path. As he lowered his lance, Martin in a desperate moment pressed a random button on the time machine strapped to his torso, a reflex hoping to produce some distracting sparks as a comedic effect. To his horror, the device emitted a crackling pop, and the coil inside started spinning violently. Small electric arcs danced around the machine. The crowd gasped, enthralled. Some whispered that Martin must be conjuring lightning. Others backed away in fear. Sir Lionel's horse reared, startled by the sizzling noise. Lionel lost his balance, and with a tremendous clatter, he toppled into the mud. The collective gas from the crowd was so loud it hurt Martin's ears. He tried to maintain control of his own horse, but it galloped off unpredictably, carrying him right past the stands and out into a nearby field. Fearing an angry mob or accusations of sorcery, Martin jumped off as soon as the horse slowed enough. He sprawled onto the grass, the device on his chest sputtering with steam. Great. If he hadn't looked suspicious before, he definitely did now. Struggling to his feet, Martin brushed off the grass. When he returned to the fair, he found a mixture of excitement and trepidation among the people. The Baron, though, was delighted. "That was spectacular," he cried. "Better than the usual jousting match. You, sir, are indeed Martin the Marvelous." Meanwhile, Friar Edmund hustled over, fear etched into his face. "You must be careful," he whispered. "They think this is all a performance, but there are those who might accuse you of black magic. If the Baron's chaplain gets wind of this, he may have you tried." Martin's heart sank. The last thing he wanted was to be labeled a heretic or a sorcerer in the Middle Ages. He needed to leave, and soon. That evening, Martin made a desperate decision. He approached Friar Edmund and laid out his plan. "We must attempt the time jump tonight. I'll harness the largest amount of energy I can from the fair's fireworks display, or anything that can generate a spark. I need a quick jolt to kickstart the generator." The friar looked alarmed. "Fireworks display? You speak of the colored lights we set off to celebrate? That is but a small powder that illuminates the night. Are you sure it can help?" Martin shrugged. "I have no other option. If I can rig the machine to absorb the force of the explosion, I might open a wormhole large enough to slip through, or it might blow me to bits. But I'm running out of time, and the crowd's amusement could turn to suspicion at any moment." In the dark field beyond the fair, Friar Edmund arranged the barrels of fireworks. Martin connected wires from the machine's central coil to a small improvised capacitor. As the final moments approached, the friar lit a torch, his hands trembling. Martin took a deep breath, remembering everyone who had told him time travel was a fool's errand. "Well," he muttered, "they weren't entirely wrong." He nodded to the friar, who touched the torch to the fuse. A sudden sizzle, then a hiss. Sparks danced. Martin hugged the device to his chest, bracing for the worst. The fireworks erupted in a dazzling shower of colors and noise. At that exact moment, Martin flicked the switch, trying to channel the blast's force. A thunderous crack split the air. Intense light blinded him. He felt the rush of energy surge through his contraption. The world spun wildly. He could smell singed grass and felt wind whipping around him. Was it working, or was he just flying through the air? Then suddenly, silence. He opened his eyes to find himself once again on solid ground. This time, he was in what appeared to be a large parking lot, lined with modern cars. A bright neon sign read, "Renaissance Fair, Authentic Medieval Experience." Martin's head pulsed with confusion. People in jeans and t-shirts walked around, some wearing silly medieval get-ups for fun. He blinked, momentarily disoriented. This wasn't ancient Rome, and it wasn't actually the Middle Ages either, but a modern medieval festival. Had his machine overshot or undershot, or Maybe it had corrected itself in some unpredictable way, depositing him back closer to his original timeline, but in the middle of an anachronistic reenactment event. Dazed, Martin spotted a clownish jester on stilts, passing out flyers. "Step right up. Enjoy the Renaissance Fair," the jester said, offering Martin a flyer. "We've got the most authentic medieval experience this side of the ocean." Martin, clutching the battered remains of his time machine, stared at the flyer, uncertain whether to laugh or cry. A group of travelers in elaborate knights and maidens costumes strolled by, carrying their phones and snapping selfies. Overhead, a small plane roared by, and the air smelled of modern-day fried food. He began to laugh, a deep, weary laugh that startled a few passers-by. After all the effort to see ancient Rome, he'd ended up in a genuine medieval fair, only to jump forward in time and land in a modern-day medieval fair. It was fair after fair, but never the right fair. A comedic, cosmic joke. Wiping tears of either joy or frustration, Martin sighed. "Well," he muttered to himself, "maybe third time's the charm. Let's see if I can fix this thing again. Perhaps the next jump will land me in the stadium next to Emperor Trajan. But first, I might treat myself to a funnel cake." Even though it wasn't the real ancient Rome he'd yearned for, it struck him that maybe the wonders of time travel existed not in perfectly landing at one's destination, but in appreciating the unexpected stops. He could give it another try, but for tonight, he was content to watch costume knights gather around a plastic table with hot dogs as a gesture on stilts told jokes under neon floodlights. Martin realized that people would go to extraordinary lengths to recreate and celebrate the past, and perhaps that was the real magic of everyone. In their own era, longing to experience some slice of a bygone world. He gently patted his contraption, battered but fixable, musing on how bizarrely comedic his adventures had been. And as he walked toward the modern fair's entrance, the thatched huts and banners lit artificially by strings of light bulbs, he couldn't help one last shout, "Romans! Lend me your—" well, never mind, maybe next time. Then he joined the crowd heading into the swirling lights of a carnival that pretended to be medieval, while he knew he'd been in the real deal just a short while ago. He quietly planned his next attempt, all the while chuckling at the memory of the Baron's confused face, the boisterous jousting, and the baronial keep that smelled decidedly too medieval to be fake. There would always be another chance to meet Emperor Trajan, Martin told himself. He'd just have to refine the machine and maybe read more than half a manual. But for now, maybe a nice cold drink would do. It turned out that traveling through the centuries was thirsty work, especially if one did it wrong. And comedic confusion, as Martin realized, was the true hallmark of his ongoing saga.